Welcome back to the secret classroom here on the FreeMelon Society. I'm going to be your teacher today. My name's Eli Martyr, and I'm really happy that you're here because today is going to be a very important lesson for everybody in the health community to hear. You see, we have a big problem on our hands. The world is filled with people that are inherently good. And as we grow, our environment, our parents, our friends, our influences from culture, all go to shaping the type of character that you're going to end up being. And that inherent original goodness is filtered through and is modified and changed, edited and tweaked and molded by the influence of our surroundings, such that the newly developing human being orients itself to the world that they're going to be living in. Now, on average, despite people's almost infinite types of variations and differences from one person to another, they still come intact with a certain degree of moral coherences common to everyone. And these moral coherences help maintain functional societal relationships in whatever cultural or national permutation that they adopt. The problem is, though, is that this world is being prepared by a certain class of individuals, a class of individuals who are fundamentally not like you and not like the rest of the regular human crowd who have this intact moral coherence that characterizes their lifestyle. This special class of people and groups and organizations, at the highest level, these people have had the inherent goodness almost thoroughly conditioned out of their minds. Some have been bred from the very beginning, from the very outset, to be these empathy-deleted human shells that make very useful pawns in bringing about a result in the world, a result planned for the direction of the entire human race to embark on. And this class of empathy-deleted individuals and their empathy-deleted mates are working to pull unsuspecting do-gooders like yourself and myself in the direction of their choosing. Now, this group of individuals is so fundamentally different from you or I that the average person concludes that people like that couldn't possibly exist, and it makes us incredulous that their machinations have any validity. So now we get to present time. Self-responsibility for health is a growing trend, thank God. And moral maturity now has started to stir in the hearts and minds of individuals, as evidenced by the vegan movement, which is the topic of this lecture. But sadly, evil knows this. And one of the things that evil really likes to do is exploit the inherent goodness of the majority of the human race. The majority of the human race that have some moral fabric, some sort of emotional connection to the events that happen on the rest of the world. And they exploit your moral virtue by putting on the garbs of nobility and dressing their movement in the garbs of value and the same morality that you would otherwise espouse. And using your yearning to do good in the world to carry out their game plan without you knowing, because you think that you are doing goodness. This is the greatest trick that evil has played on the human mind, and it has been doing it from time immemorial. It's doing it right now. And if you think that the vegan movement is free from the taint of evil, is free from the infiltration and the hijacking of evil, you are sorely and badly mistaken. And if you are lacking key information, then you are going to be a useful pawn. You are going to be no different than the people that do evil in this world for your lack of understanding. Because you, in thinking you are doing good, will actually be working to your own destruction and the destruction of everybody around you. Because evil has planted its poison seed in your beliefs, and then we act on those beliefs, and then the world produces for us the consequences of our actions. And we wonder why things are still in such disarray, such disorder. There's still such rampant political corruption. Things never seem to change no matter who we vote into power. Civil rights movements here, freedom revolutions there, and then we end up right back where we started, ensconced very neatly and comfortably in the palms of the same manipulators of the world that have been directing human endeavor for the past conceivable, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of years. This video series is way past due. It's been on my mind for quite a while, and I'm really eager to get this out into the world, because this is very dear to my heart and couldn't be more important for people in the health community, in the vegan movement, to understand about the nature of their movement and how that very movement that we love and respect, if you're not careful, will actually wage war on your mind and your beliefs, and you will be on the wrong side of history, okay? If you allow what has been told to you en masse about this movement to become a fixture in your mind. And that, of course, is why you're here on this channel, this secret group, this conceptual, not physical, but this conceptual secret group of health reformers and natural philosophers who have an interest in bringing out the best in their health, the best in their minds, the best in their spirituality. This is why you guys are here. And we're going to jump back into the secret classroom and examine the movement that we know and love and orient ourselves in relation to that movement so that we actually become champions of truth and goodness rather than the version of that evil wants you to adopt. Get comfortable, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be an important one. Parents, you get your kids watching this. The younger generation needs to be on top of this type of information, but so do the adults. So let's get into the first part of this series, the hijacking of the vegan movement. Okay, so we're going to start off and just describe some brief points about veganism and what it is. And so veganism is a moral stance. It's a moral stance that recognizes the inherent value of animal and human life. Veganism identifies the exploitation, enslavement, torture, and consumption of animals or any living sentient being as flagrantly wrong when there is no justification for doing so. When no moral justification can be used to validate those actions. Now, there are many opponents to the vegan philosophy that would malign veganism and accuse it of being a movement that still creates some harm in the world. This is namely an agricultural challenge to the idea of veganism. People that detract from the vegan ideology, they say, well, agriculture causes such harm to the environment, and so if harm is caused, then, well, I may as well just adopt this other ideology where we're supporting an industry that kills and slaughters and tortures animals directly is something I should do, right? Of course, you can see there's a vast chasm of difference in the philosophy of life between these two divergent points, right? One being comfortable with the intentional destruction of life, and the other being opposed to the destruction of life, unnecessary life, directly. Now, veganism is not a claim to perfection, okay? Veganism is not a position that claims that no harm is done anywhere, en masse, at large, anywhere, just because one embraces or adopts the vegan philosophy. But veganism is simply a call to develop and make mature our moral centers, and to recognize the ignominy of a non-carnivorous species unnecessarily and willfully taking sentient life when other nutritional options are available and more health promoting to boot. Now, the growth of veganism since the mid-1900s and exponentially during the 21st century has unfortunately created a divide amongst people ideologically. It's created this divide between the old carnist ideology that can't seem to shake off the old depraved habits of the past. Customs and practices, superstitions and belief that are no longer necessary in modern life. And veganism now has created a divide between that and those conversant with updated understandings, whether from the nutritional or purely ethical perspective. But here is the problem, okay? Here is the problem. Just like any action movie, drama movie, any movie or TV show that you see on TV or in the movie theaters, there are villains in this world. Real villains. Social engineers infuse into cleverly created social movements insidious ulterior agendas that allow them to unfold more and more of a deep and long-standing plan for complete global control. All right? Now, that's a statement. It's a big statement, I know, but what we're going to do is we're going to systematically flesh out how and why this statement is correct, okay? And like I said in the introduction, all right, this class of social engineers has been doing this ever since the day you were born, long before you were born, and has become very adept and very damn good at it. And if you think for a second that there is nothing wrong with veganism as it's been presented to you in the world, and you think that social engineers have not capitalized on your desire to be either healthier or to share moral consideration to animals, if you think that they haven't capitalized on that, then you are asleep at the wheel. You do not understand this world that you live in. And I'm going to be straight. We cannot afford at this late stage of the game to have people asleep at the wheel in this manner, in this capacity. Harry Truman, who was the 33rd president of the United States, he made this comment, and he says that there's nothing new in this world except the history that you don't know. And as hopefully you discover from lectures like these and your own research, is that history is being kept from you by these same people in hopes that you will be forever operating in darkness. But luckily, humans have a tendency to resist evil when they can, and it's the only reason why we're still here today. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a little excerpt from a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Very, very good book. Very helpful in solidifying your understanding of, well, not only how the world works, but particularly the educational system. Oh, and by the way, all the sources that I've used, all the links, that will all be posted in the description below. So make sure to check that if you want to take a look at all the resources that went into putting this lesson together. Okay, so it reads, the following historical account is excerpted from my book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, page 46 to 48. In 1953, Norman Dodd, a Yale graduate, intellectual, and New York City investment banker, was chosen to be the research director for the Reese Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives in 1953. The Reese Committee was named for its creator, Republican Carroll Reese of Tennessee, and was formed to investigate the status of tax-exempt foundations. Dodd sent committee questionnaires to numerous foundations, and as a result of one such request, Joseph E. Johnson, president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, invited Dodd to send a committee staffer to Carnegie headquarters in New York to examine the minutes of the meetings of the foundation's trustees. These minutes had long since been stored away in a warehouse. Obviously, Johnson, who was a close friend of former Carnegie Endowment's president and Soviet spy Alger Hiss, had no idea what was in them. Okay, readers aside, just summarizing. So they wanted to, in 53, investigate tax-exempt foundations, right? What are all these institutions and organizations popping up, seemingly getting all this money and funding? Huge institutions that are being allowed to run tax-free. What's happening behind closed doors? How are these tax-exempt foundations so successful? What do they do? What are they actually doing in society? That is what the purpose of this committee, this investigative committee is there to find out. Okay? Reading on. The minutes revealed that in 1910, the Carnegie Endowment's trustees asked themselves this question: is there any way known to man more effective than war to so alter the life of an entire people? Now, for a year, the trustees sought an effective, peaceful method to alter the life of an entire people. Ultimately, they concluded that war was the most effective way to change people. Consequently, the trustees of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace next asked themselves, how do we involve the United States in a war? And they answered, we must control the diplomatic machinery of the United States by first gaining control of the State Department. Now, Norman Dodds stated that the trustees' minutes reinforced what the Reese Committee had uncovered elsewhere about the Carnegie Endowment. It had already become a powerful policy-making force inside the State Department. Now, during those early years of the Carnegie Endowment, war clouds were already forming over Europe, and the opportunity of enactment of their plan was drawing near. History proved that World War I did indeed have an enormous impact on the American people. For the first time in our history, large numbers of wives and mothers had to leave their homes and work in war factories, thus effectively eroding women's historic role as the heart of the family. The sanctity of the family itself was placed in jeopardy. Life in America was so thoroughly changed that, according to Dodd's findings, the trustees had the brashness to congratulate themselves on the wisdom and validity of their original decision. They sent a confidential message to President Woodrow Wilson insisting that the war not be ended too quickly. Okay, are you guys following along with this? This is an American institution that thinks that war is, for some reason, beneficial. Okay? Beneficial. And that they don't want the war to end too quickly. They're interested in maintaining a state of war for the civilization. And they don't want the current one to end too quickly, World War I, while it was going on. All right? These are the sick minds that have been at the helm of directing society in terms of this reading, at least since prior to World War I. Now, of course, it goes much further than that, but let's just keep reading. Okay, so they sent a confidential message to President Woodrow Wilson insisting that the war not be ended too quickly. Okay. After the war, the Carnegie Endowment trustees reasoned that if they could get control of education in the United States, they would be able to prevent a return to the way of life as it had been prior to the war. Did you hear that? Prevent life from reverting back to normal as it was before the war. They don't want that state of peace. God, I'm so sorry. Like it's going to take a little bit of strength for me not to get too upset in this lesson. Usually I am a bit lighthearted, but sometimes it can be hard when you're dealing with evil. Evil just leaves this sour, bitter taste in your mouth, and it's so objectionable that you can. Anyway, let's continue. So they want to get control of education, and they would prevent a return to the way of life as it had been prior to the war. They recruited the Rockefeller Foundation to assist in such a monumental task. According to Dodd's Reese Committee report, they divided the task in parts, giving to the Rockefeller Foundation the responsibility of altering education as it pertains to domestic subjects. But Carnegie retained the task of altering our education in foreign affairs and about international relations. So they're allowing the Rockefeller Foundation, okay, I'm sure that at this point many of you have heard of the Rockefeller Foundations, the Rothschild Foundations. These are rich globalist families, corporate families, that have accrued so much wealth and so much power that they now influence policy at the federal level. And so the Carnegie Endowment is saying, okay, Rockefeller, you guys take education, you control education as you see fit for the unfoldment of human economic development, right? You just control education to do what the hell you want with society, and we, Carnegie, will take care of foreign affairs, right? Okay, this is apparently a lecture about veganism. Why the heck did I just spend all that time reading that excerpt? The reason is because we've become too familiar in fractioning our learning. We need to reorient and look at things from their whole holistic perspective. And you can't understand why the vegan movement has been hijacked, and we haven't gotten into that yet. We'll get into it eventually. But we can't understand why it would be hijacked or how. We can't do that unless we understand the general broad perspective, right? And that episode in human history, the investigation of the tax-exempt foundations, is one of those ones that is very crucial and critical for you to understand, because it allows you to glean how things might be working on this planet that we're living on. All right, so that big picture, it looks something like this. There exists a secretive, super-governmental network of powerful individuals and organizations guided by a religious devotion to the adversarial force that is antithetical to all that is truth, God, and morality. And I should say, if that sounds too romanticized, too over the top, okay, all right, whatever, ultra evil people trying to take over the world, right? If you roll your eyes at this type of language, then you're suffering from lack of information. That's it. That's the only difference between people that understand how this works and people that don't. It's just a lack of information. As soon as someone gets you that information and it coordinates and makes sense with the observations of reality, then all of a sudden there's no mystery here. So you're going to have to put those assumptions on hold. Hold them in abeyance for now. Hear what we've got to say, verify it, you can corroborate for yourself, and then we can make our decisions afterward. Okay, continuing on. This network has existed for as long as humanity has, and has worked its way into the fabric of human civilization worldwide, such that nothing has eluded its influence. Any social movement that gains mass dissemination, okay, now this is really important. Any social movement that gains mass dissemination in world news, world politics, etc., is done for the purpose of furthering a core set of globalist goals. When you read enough of the literature that these globalist think tanks put out willingly throughout history, these goals become discernible. In various social directions, we are being led down like lambs to the slaughter. I haven't defined globalists. What do I mean by globalists? Globalism is the ideology of complete collectivism. Okay? So if you hear me use that term, globalist, then I'm referring to groups of people who have adopted the ideology of no national boundaries, no real regions, no division between nations and countries. It all is one homogeneous whole. The whole planet needs to work together under rulership of one centralized body. Everybody is the same tribe. There's no distinction between anybody, right? That is what globalism is. It's the mental sickness of globalism, right? And typically what you find is that people who adopt the globalist mindset are also typically atheistic. They are secular humanists, which we'll get to. They're moral relativists. They're fervently anti-religion, anti-God, anti-capitalism, anti-family, on and on it goes, okay? So anyway, that's in a nutshell what globalism means. Now, all that sounds scary and unbelievable. It can't possibly be true. But then all we have to do, all right, if it sounds too unbelievable, then all we have to do is we have to backtrack through history and see what has this group already been capable of doing. And if we can accept that they have been capable of and have done X, 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 and X in the past, right? Such and such and such and such in the past, then it starts to be not so out of the realm of believability and credibility that they could possibly be hijacking the ideology that you thought was all pure and angelic, all right? So what has authority been capable of the past? All right, well, let's take a look. This is a fun one. Operation Popeye. You ever heard of Operation Popeye? It goes like this. From March 1967 until July 1972, the U.S. military spent over $3 million per year conducting a top-secret operation in Southeast Asia. The goal was to extend the monsoon, okay, listen to this, extend the monsoon season and flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the system of supply routes used by enemy fighters in Vietnam. The Americans hoped to cause landslides, wash out river crossings, and just generally disrupt the movement of North Vietnamese troops. It was the first large-scale effort to manipulate the weather for military purposes. Okay? Now, why is that important? Because we're talking about 1967, and we're already talking about effective weather modification. No consideration for the other consequences of messing with the world that you live on, right? The world that you live in. No scruple about the consequences to the ecology, right? A military application of weather modification. Screw what happens to the civilians and non-military personnel. No, that's inconsequential. Let's just do what we need to do and call it a day. Now, I have to be careful with my wording here. There are sensitive computer formula that might not like elements of your video if you have certain wording. So I have to be careful with my wording here because I don't exactly know what might trigger it, but okay, I'll put this on the screen. I'm gonna say little human in place of this word. So this is an episode of state-sponsored little human abuse rings. In Omaha, Nebraska in 1988, a massive scandal of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union broke out, as it was raided by the federal agencies investigating the institution. It turns out that a network of government agents, intelligence agencies, in collusion with the credit union, were involved in an underground enterprise of, okay, I gotta be careful here, little human forceful retrieval and ritual unpleasant behavior and Santa Claus ritual termination of vitality. Okay? Santa Claus ritual termination of vitality. And also little human exploitation for trafficking drugs, money, and other illicit substances. All right? This is a very, very dark chapter in modern human history. You can read all about it in the Franklin Coverup by John Decamp. Read this a long time ago, had my world shattered, getting me ready to, well, make a channel like this. Okay, let's talk about pathological education. H.L. Mencken, who was an American journalist, essayist, satirist, cultural critic, and scholar of American English, he wrote in the American Mercury for April 1924 that the aim of public education is not, quote, to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is the aim in the United States, and that is the aim everywhere. Now, in talking about education, we should describe behaviorism. With behaviorism is the idea, it's the concept that human beings, or life forms in general, are like little machines. We are simply flesh and blood machines that can be fueled, directed, and put to work just like other mechanical devices of human ingenuity. Like a machine, some controller, some architect can just push a button and change the behavior of a living person or a living organism. The behaviorist mindset, it sees life as just purely mechanical. There is nothing intelligent governing the system. It's just pure mechanics. How we could be so embarrassingly naive is beyond me. Because in the world of mechanics, all mechanics are created by an intelligent human being for a purpose. So when we see this marvelous machine working in the way it does, we want to assume that there's no subsequent intelligent being that has created this machine. It's just human ingenuity and naivete at the same time is just so baffling sometimes. It's quite frustrating. Now, the science of human behavior has always captivated human imagination. But during the era of enlightenment and the era of capitalist industrialization, what happened is people began to think that they could control life forms like they do objects. And so prior to the Enlightenment, in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, there was a much more holistic way of viewing things, viewing the world, and viewing our relationships to things in the world. We used to embrace a more Catholic understanding. I don't mean Catholic in the religious sense. I mean Catholic as the word Catholic, it kind of means holistic, regarding things holistically in their whole. And that was more of the mindset that characterized human thinking in the Middle Ages. But with the scientific revolution of the 18th century, what started to happen was people began to regard things in a very mechanical way. And the planet that we lived on was nothing but a repository of resources for human ingenuity to go and exploit. So this ideology now of behaviorism, what we see is that it started, you can find the origins of behaviorism with a guy named Julius Sachs at the University of Würzburg. And what he did was he worked with plants. So we started with plants and we started experimenting on plants in a stimulus response way and just picking out the patterns that we could discern from stimulating plants in a particular way and seeing how they respond, and seeing if we could control the behavior of plants through mechanical means. Then one of Julius Sachs's proteges, Jacques Loeb, he also does similar stimulus response experiments, and he moves on to insects now. So we've graduated, so we're going from plants, and now, okay, well, if we can do this to plants, why not insects, right? And so he does a whole slew of experiments with insects. Ivan Pavlov, who was around from 1849 to 1936, born 1849, died in 1936. He was the guy that you might have heard of Pavlov. You know, he was the Russian behaviorist who did the experiments with dogs to prove that dogs could be taught to salivate by the ringing of a bell if you just condition the dog appropriately. And Pavlov's experiments were very influential in this burgeoning field of behaviorist studies, as we start to see that life can be manipulated in this way. This, of course, is very influential for John Watson now, who was born in 1878, died in 1958, who carried on these behaviorist experiments finally with human beings, with human babies. John Watson says, "Give me a baby and I can make any kind of man." John Watson's work subsequently became very influential for another guy, Mr. B.F. Skinner. Burrus Friedrich Skinner. B.F. Skinner, thought of as the father of behaviorism, He was an inventor and social philosopher and carried out more research on behaviorism with animals. And he determined that there is no free will, there's no human soul, no human spirit. We're not guided by any sort of intelligent anything. We've got this base set of mechanical instincts that can just be programmed like a machine. So this growing ideology now of behaviorism catches the interest and the attention of, you're going to hear this name a lot, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, right? Remember we talked about the tax-exempt foundations earlier on in this lecture. And so what does Rockefeller do? It takes the behaviorist, the humanist behaviorist ideology, and it goes and it starts putting that into education, because remember, Rockefeller now is in control of education for the rest of the modern world. So we start to infuse all the schools, all the universities with material that supports this behaviorist style thinking, that there's nothing to human beings, we're just machines. And we can be worked like pawns to be able to do things that are expedient to the manipulators. Okay? That's very important, right? Because you can see now how we're creating this mindset of the ruling class, that they have maybe a responsibility to create the right type of machines for the world that they want to develop. And they also need a whole bunch of useful pawns out there in the world to also develop this behaviorist mentality. And thus, you have the bastardized form of public education that you have today. And this grand conspiracy to control education and create a new ideology, a poisonous ideology for culture. This is what the conspirators have done. This is what authority has done, right? So this starts to be good to be able to remember when you find that you're having trouble believing that the movement that you like has also been infiltrated by these same pervasive groups and individuals. Okay? The entire education system as we know it has been designed by these subversive globalist agents. And if that doesn't get you thinking, I don't know what will. Let's move on to the Tavistock Institute on Human Relations. What is the Tavistock Institution of Human Relations? The Tavistock Institute was an organization established in London's Wellington House for the sole purpose of creating and disseminating propaganda and psychologically exploitative tactics in order to mold and shape the world in the direction the elite globalists in control of the world chose. The initial motivation for the creation of a propaganda think tank came from the despicable goal of corrupting the sensibilities and common sense of the public at large, who had no interest in embroiling themselves in or supporting a world war between Britain and Germany. The idea was to brainwash the public into accepting and even advocating the World War I conflict. This, of course, is extremely instructive, because by default, we now know that not only is the existence of an evil organization like Tavistock a verifiable truth, but it also tells us that the egregious loss of life and the destruction of World War I was planned for and eagerly desired by Satan's agents here on Earth. The Tavistock Institute has been instrumental in all mass social and cultural movements, mainstream media campaigns, and various other instruments for social manipulation ever since. If the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations is a new term for you, if you've never heard this term, if you didn't know that this organization exists, you're behind. Severely behind. All human beings have to know that organizations like this exist, like the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, the Stanford Research Institute. Okay, you have to know these exist. If you want more information, you're going to read the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations by Dr. John Coleman, Shaping the Moral, Spiritual, Cultural, Political, and Economic Decline of the United States of America. If you haven't read this book, that's unacceptable. You need to read this book. What about the most obvious calamities of the 20th century? World War I and World War II. Giuseppe Mazzini was an Italian revolutionary leader of the mid-1800s, as well as the director of the Illuminati. Albert Pike was a 33rd degree Freemason, occultist, Grand Master, and creator of the southern jurisdiction of the Masonic Scottish Rite Order. Now, just to give you an idea of how important Albert Pike is to Freemasonry and America, Albert Pike's remains, after his death, were moved to rest at the House of the Temple. The House of the Temple is a Masonic temple in Washington, D.C. The House of the Temple serves as the headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, southern jurisdiction of the USA, and is the home of the Supreme Council of 33rd degree, ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, southern jurisdiction, Washington, D.C., USA. And so Albert Pike has the distinguished honor of being buried at the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. So if that doesn't give you an idea of how important this particular Freemason was and is to Freemasonry, which is a society, an open society now, I wouldn't say as much of a secret society, but it is a society with many secrets, right? But it's not a secret that they exist, but they definitely have lots of secrets that they... So anyway, but it is an underground society of individuals that control and manipulate governments, okay? So Albert Pike wrote a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini, who was the director of the Illuminati, and he had written him a letter, and in that letter, it describes how the world wars were planned far ahead of time, okay? Like in the 1800s, the end of the 1800s. And he describes what each war is designed to achieve. If this is new to you, you have to listen to this. The letter says, the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia and of making that country a fortress for atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. Okay? Now, I don't know how well you guys know your history, but that is exactly what happened. Okay? That is exactly what happened. And these shots were being called in the 19th century, okay, prior to World War I. So this is long-range planning, long-range planning. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed, and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. So this prediction now spans to World War II, where Albert Pike is saying what's going to happen, telling Mazzini that by setting ideologies, created ideologies to clash together, there's going to be turmoil and it's going to result in a homeland in Israel for the Zionists. Okay? Now, I don't know how well you know your history, but what was described there about World War II is exactly what has happened. Exactly. Right? He also goes on to talk about the Third World War. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. Now, the rest of the letter goes on, and there's a very famous section that is quoted all the time. It's fantastic. Basically, he ends up talking about how we just destroy everyone, bamboozle everyone into a state of complete utter despair. Religious ideologies have all been shattered, and in this chaos, these remnants of human despair, he says that the pure doctrine of Lucifer is now ready to captivate the minds of humanity. And that will be the religion going forth into the new world. So again, this is another example. We've got the pre-planning and carrying out of World War I, World War II for particular purposes. And this happened way, way before there was anything like internet, cell phones, and whatnot. If you think that they were capable of that then, and not capable of influencing the vegan movement to do all of the same ridiculously tyrannical and human compromising things, then again, you have to see that this might be a little bit childish, a little uninformed, right? Nothing has escaped the vision of this class of individuals and organizations. 9/11, massive occult ritual riddled with symbolic numerology designed to serve as a pretext or justification to fool weak minds into championing the rape and pillage of the Middle East. Why? Because we needed to set up agents and military bases all over the Middle East and exploit resources, etc., and create a precursor to the inevitable war between the Muslims and the Zionists, right? Just like Albert Pike was saying.
As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Well, this whole idea that you have some documents which you say that the government had advanced knowledge that 9/11 could happen.
Absolutely.
And didn't work to stop it. Now, I find a hard time believing you actually believe that.
Why? I'm a Vietnam veteran, and they lied to me about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and that was the false flag operation that put us into the Vietnam War, where 58,000 of my generation were killed. False flag operations, if you go through history, happen all the time before these wars.
The documents you use on 9/11 show, well, there's one document that suggests that Tower 7 fell down faster than it could have fallen down just by natural.
It doesn't suggest it, it says it. It said it fell at, NIST report said it fell at free fall.
So then you make the
wait a
leap
minute. That means you got to defy the laws of physics. That means everything was removed in which for anything to fall at free fall speed.
But then you make that leap then to the idea that it was demolished by explosives inside by the government.
I don't make a leap. Why didn't they check for explosives? They never did, if not to eliminate them. They didn't do that. This book is all documents that are out in the public domain. I'm not WikiLeaks. I didn't steal anything. You just got to find them. And there are documents here so disturbing, like the CIA's assassination manual.
What about communism itself? The most dangerous worldwide existential threat to humanity that existed for the entire 20th century. Doesn't get any bigger than that. So what happens then when you discover that the whole thing was a bloody lie, all orchestrated by the team that you thought were the good guys. In the book, Gladio, highly recommend that you read this book as well. It says that we were told that we were fighting for the ultimate truth and freedoms represented by Western democracy. If we, at any moment, dropped our guard, the Soviet menace, coiled and ready to spring, would strike. Only the ceaseless vigilance of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization spared us from the monstrous and tyrannical Soviet Empire. It was taken for granted by millions that the atomic mushroom cloud was tinged a bright hue of red. But there is quite a different version. At the peak of Cold War paranoia, now listen to this, at the peak of Cold War paranoia in the late 1960s, NATO unsheathed its weapons on the very people it was chartered to protect. The sole motive was the preservation of the massive war machine. NATO lurched into a guerrilla war against ordinary Europeans going about their daily lives, a psychological campaign of brutal synthetic violence. What that means is that NATO, used deception techniques and created false public terror attacks, basically public terrorism, designed to look like communist terrorism, right? Or Soviet-style communist terrorism. And it used that to terrorize civilians into perpetuating and maintaining the threat, the belief that communism was coming to the West, and communism was coming to destroy everyone and take over. So they started launching terror campaigns all over Europe, dressed as Soviet soldiers, and blaming all sorts of mishaps, car and bus bombings and shootings and whatnot. They were terrorizing Europe and pretending to be communist, basically. And they did this, why? Just like we talked about in the Reese hearings earlier on, to maintain and perpetuate the state of war. So this Cold War that just extended on and on and on and on and on for so many years. And it was because NATO and the UN and other social engineers wanted it to be that way. Yeah, so everything that we hear about history in the public school sector, public schooling, university schooling, everything we're taught about history from those sources is wrong. Silent weapons for quiet wars. I've referred to this document, this insidious document, before. In 1954, the Quiet War was announced in secret as world policy at the Bilderberg's first meeting. And basically, to make this short, basically this is a document that was unveiled at a secret meeting that served as a direction to take humanity. It was a blueprint, a game plan for how globalists were going to engineer events, right, moving forward in the rest of the 20th century. And, you can see the table here. I'm not going to read all of this, but you can see the top here. It might be hard to read, actually. It says diversion is the primary strategy. Experience has proven that the simplest method for securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of basic systems, principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other hand. Keeping you distracted with matters of no real importance. 1. By disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, and providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design, and economics, and by discouraging technical creativity. 2. By engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities. By unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks. Let me just stop right there. Does any of this start to make sense now when you take a look at this world that's obsessed and is drowning in this mental disease of self-victimhood and this victimization culture that is being adopted by the young generation right now? Is this making sense? The plan is to create people who are susceptible to emotional mind control. emotional mind control and playing on your emotions, right? Or your moral fiber, like we'll be getting into when it comes to veganism, right? By playing on that and doing things with it and inserting the poison pill so that we do a whole bunch of heinous things. Okay, continuing. Unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks by way of a constant barrage of sex, violence, and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers. B, giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. And 3, rewriting history and law, and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. My goodness. You can't, I know I refer to this document every once in a while because it's just so profound. And whenever you do, man, if there's one way to just ruin your day, it's reading Silent Weapons for a Quiet War. This will get your blood boiling every time you read it. Man. Look, last item on this list. I promise. We could go on forever, but this is going to be the last item. The sinking of the Titanic. We're told that the Titanic just sailed into an iceberg. That's what we're told about the Titanic, and it sunk. That's not what happened. The midst of the Industrial Revolution, a remarkably explosive period during the mid-19th century, where the world cabal decided that the time was right to introduce into society technological mechanization. The European religio-corporate globalist elites were in a race to dominate the world of physics, education, and economics, to monopolize the world's energy production. Now, not all captains of industry were on board with this dark cabal that sought to destroy free market capitalism, human freedom, and there were pockets of resistance to the spread of globalism. This contention between warring parties of elites built up until a plan was hatched to swiftly bring an end to the major opposers of the global elites and their ambition to dominate world finance via the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank. They did this by creating mass hype and hysteria around the construction of the Titanic, which would attract all the rich and powerful to be part of its maiden voyage. They would also, in the same year, 1913, establish the Federal Reserve Bank soon after the Titanic was sunk. If you believe this to be a coincidence, then I've got a slap in the face I could give you. The cabal got rid of those industrialists who took issue to the New World Order and were in direct opposition to the establishment of the Federal Reserve. These men, this group of highly influential captains of industry, were Benjamin Guggenheim, John Jacob Astor, and Isidor Straus. There may have been others, but these were the people that were on the maiden voyage of the Titanic that were all assassinated when the Titanic sunk. J.P. Morgan, conveniently, who was scheduled to be on the Titanic, failed to show up that day. Very lucky for him. The Jesuit Society, as usual, provided immense planning and funding for the entire scandal. I don't have time to get into who the Jesuits were. This is something that we'll have to get into another time. But basically, the Jesuits are the military arm of the Catholic Church. So they're kind of like the black budget dark agents, the military order that does the dirty work for the Catholic Church, right? For the Vatican. Whew. Okay. Well, that is certainly a mouthful. Now, we still at this point have not even touched veganism, which is the purpose of this entire video series, all right? We haven't even gotten close to there. But it was necessary to set this up, to give this enough padding of context, to show you, because there are going to be people that are incredulous out there, right? As soon as you say there's something wrong with the vegan ideology, you're going to have people that are just going to immediately dismiss any criticism because there's a self-identity that we place in the vegan ideology, right? the vegan philosophy, which I can perfectly understand. But I wanted to just make it very clear what the world has done in the past so that we know that currently today, that same level of corruption is just as likely to be exited. And of course, it is. So we're going to stop there for now. This will be the end of part 1 of this video series. And in part 2 of the series, we're going to start taking a look at environmentalism and how this all starts to apply to the vegan deception, right? To the infiltration of veganism, all right? Thank you very much for sitting with me in this lesson here in the FreeMelon Society in the secret classroom. I really appreciate your time and attention. This subject couldn't be more important, and it does deserve to be fleshed out. So I don't know exactly how many parts are going to be in this series as of right now, is the time of shooting this first part. I would imagine this might be a 3-part series. If I can get everything done in 2, then I will. But this might have to be a 3-part series. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time here, back here in the secret classroom. Okay, I love you very much, guys. Thank you so much for your attention. Subscribe to this channel. Make sure that you don't miss videos and other lectures and content that I put out here on the channel. And in the meantime, stay healthy, stay sharp, keep reading, expand your knowledge. Right? Do not let this world confuse you. Root yourself in truth, root yourself in principle, root yourself in value, so that you're not fooled and swayed by the cunning, but transparent tactics that evil uses. There is a war being waged out there for the captivation of your mind, and you need to be strong and steadfast and root yourself in essential foundational information so that we can maintain our integrity in this world. All right? Go in peace, guys. All right, we'll see you on the next one. Take care.